we're going to move on to our last speaker for this clinical trial panel, which is such an honor for me to introduce Dr. Don Wood. He is the CEO of the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And to my understanding, and Dr. Wood, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first patient advocacy event that you've attended as the CEO of the MDA that is not an MDA event. And I think this is also the first time any MDA CEO is showing up at another patient advocacy event. Is that right?
I think you're right, Susan. I think you're right. So,
Don, as one of Jerry's kids, I've always loved the MDA and all they do for families for CMT. I'm so excited to have you here today to discuss how patients can collect their voices and advocate for their disease. If there's a model, you all are it. And we're so grateful to have your partnership, to have you here, and to be on this journey to end CMT together. So I'll turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Susan. I am going to not only thank you, but I am going to start with the purpose why I'm here, which is something I think you'll be very familiar with. Together, we will end the legacy of CMT. Together. Yeah. Together is the answer. Okay, together is the answer. What's exciting about this conference, and boy, this is fun. I mean, I'm learning myself. I mean, I thought I knew a lot about CMT. I'm learning all kinds of new things about CMT, and etc. But I think everybody here that's listening in and has listened in since yesterday and today, I hope that you realize that you are pioneers in a new form of medicine that has never before existed, and it's what I call genetic medicine. Back in the day, when I was in school, et cetera, genetic diseases actually weren't even taught much about in medical school. In fact, you can go back and see medical textbooks that indicated that there was no hope for anybody with a genetic disease because, we couldn't get to the DNA, we couldn't do any of those kinds of things. And we are living in the first decade, basically, of genetic medicine. And so you're hearing things that are what I call pioneering steps in that area of genetic medicine. How do you approach a treatment or a clinical trial for a treatment of a disease that may have subsets of patients that there are only hundreds of them or 1,000 of them, et cetera, et cetera. It's a whole new approach, and the standard way in which the FDA has looked at diseases up till now is working with tens of thousands of patients and double-blind placebo-controlled trials, which are the gold standards, et cetera. But we face a new era when we have fewer patients to work with. And the other aspect of genetic diseases that is brand new is many of them, such as CMT, especially in the neuromuscular area, are progressive, so they get worse over time. So you heard, well, in order to do a clinical trial in diseases that get worse over time, what are the endpoints you're looking for? What are the beginning points you're looking for in a clinical trial? The measures that have been developed, 50 years ago don't fit if the person in the clinical trial is an infant. What endpoint are you looking for in terms of figuring out whether the gene therapy is going to work in that area? So the reason I'm spending so much time on that aspect of it is that in this pioneering new era of medicine, all of medicine, and genetic medicine, we need participation of people who have the disease, and because it's genetic, we also need participation of their families, the same way you live it. I mean, if you have the disease and you're in a family, the family also works with the disease, et cetera. And we need the participation of patients. And we need them in multiple areas. And I'm not going to go through all the areas because Susan has and the CMT Research Foundation lays out all kinds of ways you can support. I want to focus on one area. In terms of an overall strategy that MDA has in terms of trying to move this kind of field along. What can we do? What kind of voluntary health agency like MDA do to help move things along? Well, we do have a collection of resources that, if they're put together in the right way, can reduce the time it takes to do a clinical trial. It can reduce the cost of the clinical trial, and it can identify patients more quickly if we do certain things than a pharmaceutical company can do. What do I mean by that? Concept is MDA has a care center network across the country. We have about 150 MDA care centers where folks who are specialists in neuromuscular disease see patients. And so over the course of a year, we will see 90 to 100,000 patients through these care centers. That's one aspect. Then skipping over to another aspect, we are in contact, as you can well imagine, with any and every pharmaceutical company that's involved with neuromuscular disease, including the ones that Keith put up earlier in talking about those that are involved in CMT. Right now, we know and are in contact with what's amazing is over 250 biotech and pharmaceutical companies that are in this space now, either in preclinical or trying to look for clinical trials. And they cover a plethora, as they say, of different kinds of approaches with small molecules, biomedical steps, et cetera, and gene therapy. But one of the things that we started a few years ago, which is now becoming more apparently important, is what we call our data hub or registry. In this data hub or registry, we take information from clinicians and nurses, et cetera, and people who have neuromuscular disease, and put them into a registry where the data are compiled for each disease and for each patient with the disease. And it's not just a one-time thing. It is, if you're as you know, as patients with CMT, you go to your doctor on a sort of regular basis, whether it's a couple times a year or whatever. But each time a patient who's in our registry comes to the doctor, the new data are put into the registry. And why is this important? Why do that? It's because when a pharmaceutical company is interested in identifying patients for a clinical trial, they have certain criteria they want to include for the patients in that clinical trial. And it could be the progression of the disease, where they are in the progression of the disease, and right down to the actual defect that in the gene that's causing the disease. And they're looking for patients that fit sort of that profile. Well, the registry allows the pharmaceutical company to come in and take a look at all the patients that are there that fit that profile. And so those individuals can be contacted directly in terms of their interest in participation, along with the physician who is treating that particular individual. So it shortens the time that a pharmaceutical company that has a particular therapy that they're looking to work with, it shortens the time for them to become part of the clinical trial, and it reduces the cost, et cetera. So that's very exciting. And so but it can't be done without patients. It can't be done without folks with the diseases participating. And the other thing that it can't be done with is it needs support. It costs something to put patients into the registry, to keep it going, et cetera. And so when Susan and I were talking about partnering in trying to move clinical trials forward more quickly at lower expense to the pharmaceutical companies. And this is another area of discussion where partnering together makes a ton of sense, because you can't do this without the patients. You've got a strong research program. We too fund an enormous amount of research in the CMT space. I think over the course of a few decades, it's probably totals something in the order of 40 million or 50 million. But just before I came on, I got a note from my chief Officer of Research, Dr. Sharon Hesterly, who, by the way, is available to answer questions, I think, in the question and answer session, about a new funding approach we have down at the University of Miami to streamline gene identification and therapy development efforts for Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. I'm not going to go through all the details of that, but I do want to highlight a strategy for gene therapy that we haven't talked about, although it's implied in many of the presentations that you've heard. And that is that while it is true that you can identify a gene that causes a particular disease, like Charcot-Marie-Tooth or spinal muscular atrophy, the issue for gene therapy, or one issue or one potential for gene therapy, is what is the defect to the gene that actually causes the disease? If the therapeutic approach is to replace the entire gene, then that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the defect is, then that'll work. But what if you don't have a capability of replacing the entire gene? We face that in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. The gene is too huge to stuff into the current vectors. And so we've had to move to strategies like micro genes and stuff to have different strategies. But when it comes to the defects within a gene, there can be some defects where bits of the gene are missing. There can be other defects where bits of the gene are reversed. There can be other defects, et cetera, et cetera. I can go on and on and on. Now, what about a therapy that comes along and can fix that type of defect? So that if it's a piece of a gene that's missing, it's the kind of thing that comes in and can edit genes and replace the piece of the gene, That technology, and this is very important, I hope I can emphasize, that technology can then be used for any person who has that defect. So the knowledge of what precise defect you have in your gene is important in thinking about the next pioneering steps in gene therapy. We need to get those data together. Right now, it probably will maybe not surprise this group, but surprises other groups that I talk to. About 40% of people who are diagnosed with Charcot-Marie-Tooth don't have the gene identified, and certainly don't have the gene defect into the gene identified. So we have a lot of things that we can do together to try to get that information into a registry like our data hub, because you never know. And another reason why MDA funds multiple disorders in neuromuscular disease is precisely because information now in this new gene therapy area, in one area, is potentially applicable to another area, another disease, et cetera. And that's what we're seeing. And so it's very, like I said, it's a pioneering time. It's a very exciting time for moving things forward. Partnering with the CMT Research Foundation makes total sense if you think about it. We're in this together in a new era. We're pioneers together. I'm like I said, very excited to have been asked by Susan to participate with you folks. I hope to hear from many of you. And Susan and I agreed that we are going to stay in very close connection and touch. So she knows everything we're doing in the CMT space, and we know what they're doing, and we'll find ways to continue to partner as again, the way I started, and let me end the same way. Together, we will end the legacy of CMT. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Don. It is so awesome to have your commitment and MDA's commitment to our disease. You've been there from the beginning, and you're still with us now. So thank you. Really appreciate it.